The organizer's voice had gone a little hoarse by the time he made the announcement for the 6th time that afternoon. Last call, ladies and gentlemen. $10,000 to anyone who can solve all 5 problems on the board in under 45 minutes. Pencil and paper only. No calculators, no phones. Anyone want to try? The Grande Prairie Mathematics Challenge had been running for 2 days inside the Evergreen Civic Center, and the gymnasium smelled like burnt coffee and dry erase markers. Outside, the Alberta sky was the particular shade of grey that arrives in early November and doesn't leave until April. Inside, the crowd had thinned to maybe 60 people. Parents gathering up their children's belongings, a few high school teachers comparing notes near the water station, and 3 university students in matching hoodies from the University of Calgary who had come specifically for the Open Challenge board, and were now debating loudly whether problem 4 was even solvable with the constraints given. Across 2 days, 22 competitors had taken a seat at the challenge table. 22 had stood up without the check. The closest had been a second-year doctoral student from the University of Alberta, a young woman named Priya Shenoy, who'd solved 4 of the 5 problems in 38 minutes before the 5th one stopped her cold. She'd stared at it for the remaining 7 minutes with the focused, slightly terrified expression of someone who knows exactly where they went wrong but cannot find the door back. When the buzzer sounded, she pressed both palms flat on the table, took a breath, and walked away to polite applause. She did not look at the board again. A hand went up near the refreshment table. Not fast. The kind of hand that goes up slowly with certainty, the way a man raises his hand when he already knows the answer and is simply waiting for the room to catch up. The hand belonged to a man who appeared to be somewhere in his mid-70s, though the way he held himself made it difficult to say. He was wearing a green canvas jacket that had been washed too many times and a plaid flannel shirt underneath it. His hair was white and cut close to his head. He had the kind of face that had been outdoors for most of its life. Not weathered exactly, but settled. He was sitting in a folding chair near the back wall with a paper cup of tea balanced on one knee and a younger man beside him who had a cane propped against the wall and the distracted, gentle expression of someone who has learned to move through the world more carefully than he used to. "I'd like to try," the old man said, his voice carried without effort. One of the Calgary students, a tall young man with rectangular glasses and a tournament lanyard around his neck, turned around. His name was Owen Pratt, and he had placed second in the regional mathematics Olympiad the previous spring and was not shy about mentioning it. He looked at the man in the canvas jacket for a moment. "Sir," he said, not unkindly, but with the particular brand of patience that young people sometimes extend to the elderly like a gift they're confident will be appreciated, "these are graduate-level topology and combinatorics problems. Problem 3 alone requires familiarity with Ramsey theory. You're welcome to look them over, but the time constraint is quite strict. Type respect in the comments if you believe a man's age tells you nothing about what his mind still carries." His name was Fernand? No. His name was Gilles? No. His name was Conrad Beaumont, and he was 74 years old, and he had driven the 91 kilometers from his small house outside Valley View, Alberta, because his neighbor's grandson, a young man named Joel Assiniboine, a former corporal in the Royal Canadian Regiment who had come back from Kandahar with a repaired shoulder and a quieter way of being in rooms, had asked him along. "There's a mathematics competition, Conrad. Big one. You said you liked problems." Conrad had said yes the way he said yes to most things, with a small nod and a pause, as if he were checking something internally before committing. He drove a 2001 Dodge Ram with a cracked dashboard and a thermos of green tea in the cup holder. His hands showed the slight stiffness of a man who had spent many years working with them in ways that left marks. Not trembling, just deliberate. Like hands that had learned the cost of carelessness. He had been retired for 29 years from the Canadian Forces. He almost never spoke about it. Joel knew Conrad had served. Conrad had mentioned it once, briefly, the way some men mention a chapter of a book they've already closed. He hadn't said where or in what capacity, only that he'd been away for a long time and that it had changed how he thought about things, which problems were real and which ones only looked real from far away. Joel hadn't pressed. There are men you don't press, and Conrad was one of them. Joel had asked him on the drive in what kind of competition this was. Conrad asked whether it was pure mathematics or applied. Joel said he wasn't entirely sure, probably both, probably very hard. Conrad said, "Who sets the problems?" Joel said he didn't know. Conrad had nodded and looked out the window at the highway and said nothing more until they reached Grande Prairie. They had been at the Civic Center for 3 hours. Conrad had watched 14 competitors take the challenge table from a folding chair near the back wall. He'd watched Owen Pratt, the Calgary student with the lanyard, take his turn that morning, aggressive, fast, confident, and solve 3 problems cleanly before the 4th stopped him at the 27-minute mark. Pratt had stared at the board for a long time after, tapping his pencil against the heel of his hand, then packed up his materials and went back to his friends and said something that made 2 of them laugh and 1 of them nod in sympathy. Conrad had watched him solve 3, watched him stop, watched him deflect, and Conrad had said nothing. The competition coordinator was a woman named Helen McCready, 63 years old, a retired professor of mathematics from Grande Prairie Regional College, who had taken on the event because the organizing committee needed someone who could actually read the problems. Helen had been watching Conrad for most of the day, the way you watch a man you can't quite place. She didn't know the face, but she knew the way a man sits when he's been thinking seriously for 50 years, which is differently from the way men sit when they've been thinking seriously for 10. Helen crossed the gymnasium floor before Owen Pratt could say anything more. "Sir, you'd like to attempt the challenge?" Conrad nodded. "I'll need pencil and paper." Helen looked at him for a moment, not skeptically. She was past the age of making that particular mistake. She handed him a fresh pad of graph paper, 2 sharpened pencils, and a pencil eraser, and she showed him to the challenge table. The challenge table was a folding table at the front of the gymnasium, set perpendicular to a whiteboard on which 5 problems had been written in Helen's careful block lettering. Problem 1 was a combinatorics question involving graph coloring. Problem 2 was a proof by induction on a recursive sequence. Problem 3, which had stopped nearly everyone, was a Ramsey theory problem requiring a proof of a specific partition result. Problem 4 was a geometric topology question about surface embeddings. Problem 5, the one that had stopped Priya Shenoy, was a question about number theory about certain properties of prime distributions in a constrained arithmetic progression. Conrad sat down. He put on a pair of reading glasses from his jacket pocket. He read all 5 problems in order without writing anything. He read them slowly, the way a man reads a menu at a restaurant he's visited many times, not because the options are unfamiliar, but because he wants to make sure nothing has changed. Then he picked up the pencil. Owen Pratt drifted closer, arms crossed, one of his colleagues beside him. A few parents who hadn't left yet had noticed the gathering near the front. Joel Assiniboine was standing near the side wall with his cane, watching with the particular stillness of a man who had learned, in difficult circumstances, to trust his instincts about people. The room coordinator, a young volunteer named Tasha, looked at the clock. "Sir, just to confirm the rules. 5 problems, 45 minutes from the buzzer, pencil and paper only, no aids of any kind. You need to show full working on each solution. Partial credit is not awarded for the prize, but the judges may review your notation if a question arises." Conrad nodded without looking up from the paper. "Understood." Owen cleared his throat, not loudly, just enough. "Sir, if you find yourself stuck on problem 3, there's no shame in." Conrad looked up at him. It was a brief look, not unfriendly, not anything at all, really, except the absence of any particular concern. "Thank you," Conrad said. Then he looked back at the paper. Helen McCready pressed the button on the timer. "Type respect in the comments one more time. Some of you are about to understand why." The buzzer sounded at 2:23 in the afternoon on a Saturday in November. Conrad was already writing when it sounded. He did not flinch at the noise. He did not look at the clock. He wrote with the same careful deliberateness with which he had picked up the pencil. Not hurried, not slow, the pace of a man who has learned the difference between speed and haste. Problem 1 took him 6 minutes and 40 seconds. His solution filled half a page of graph paper, the notation clean and spare. No crossed out lines. Problem 2 took him 8 minutes and 15 seconds, a full page. The inductive step was handled in 3 lines that Helen McCready, standing 5 feet away, would later describe as elegant, in the way that a well-built door is elegant. No excess, nothing decorative, nothing there that doesn't need to be there. Problem 3, the one that had stopped more than half the field, took him 11 minutes and 4 seconds. When his pencil stopped moving, Owen Pratt, who had been watching from 6 feet away, went very still. He leaned forward slightly. He read the working from where he stood. Then he read it again. He did not say anything. Problem 4 took 9 minutes and 30 seconds, and then Conrad stopped. He set down his pencil. He picked up the eraser, considered the work on problem 5 for perhaps 3 seconds, and then picked the pencil back up and began writing again. He finished problem 5 at 2:59:41 p.m. The timer read 36 minutes and 41 seconds. Helen McCready looked at her stopwatch. She looked up at the whiteboard, then at Conrad's solution sheets, then at Conrad, who was setting the pencil down and pressing his palms flat on the table and beginning the slow process of standing up. Slow because he was 74. Slow because his left hip had been rebuilt once and protested cold weather, but moving the way a man moves when the work is finished. For a moment no one spoke. Owen Pratt had stopped moving completely. He was reading Conrad's solution sheets from where he stood, and his expression had changed in a way he clearly hadn't planned for and wasn't entirely sure what to do with. Helen stepped forward and picked up the 5 pages of solutions. She read them in order, deliberately. She got to problem 3 and paused. She read it again. Then she looked up. "These are correct," she said. She said it quietly, the way you say something when you want it to be heard, but don't want it to sound like a performance. "All 5. And there," she paused. "The solution to problem 3 is not the standard approach. I've never seen this particular method." The room had gone the specific kind of quiet that falls over a space when everyone in it realizes simultaneously that something is happening that they will remember. Joel Assiniboine, standing near the side wall, was not crying exactly, but there was something happening in his face that he wasn't managing as well as he might have liked. Owen Pratt found his voice. It came out before he'd quite decided to use it. He must have seen these problems before. He must have known the set. Did he have access to the problem sheet? Did anyone give him? Helen held up one hand. "Owen." Her voice was steady. "These problems were finalized at 8 o'clock this morning. They were not shared outside this room. I wrote them myself." Owen's mouth opened and closed. He looked at Conrad, who was tucking his reading glasses back into his jacket pocket. "Sir," Owen said, and his voice had changed. Not hostile now, not condescending, something quieter, something that sounded like a person who has just encountered something larger than the frame he brought to the room. "Who taught you to think like that?" Conrad considered him for a moment. "A man named Pelletier," he said, "long time ago." He picked up his green canvas jacket from the back of the chair. A woman in a grey blazer was walking quickly across the gymnasium from the registration area near the entrance. She moved with the brisk certainty of someone who has spent a career in institutions that reward directness. Her name tag read Dr. Vivian Okafor, and beneath her name in smaller letters, Department of Mathematics, University of Alberta. She had been at the event as an external judge for the competition's academic credibility, working a consultation table near the main entrance, and she had not witnessed the solving. What she had seen walking over was a cluster of people standing very still around the challenge table, and what she had heard was a young man saying the name Pelletier. Dr. Okafor stopped 4 feet from the table. She looked at the solution sheets in Helen's hands. She looked at the registration form clipped to the competition clipboard that the young volunteer Tasha was holding, still holding, had not thought to put down. Her eyes found the name near the bottom of the Day 2 sign-up sheet. Beaumont, Conrad, age 74. Affiliation, none listed. Dr. Okafor looked at Conrad's face. Then she said, very quietly, the way a person says something they've been half expecting to say for a long time without knowing it. "Conrad Beaumont, CF Signals, Petawawa, the Applied Mathematics Unit." Conrad had been reaching for his jacket. His hand stopped. The lines around his eyes shifted, just briefly, the way they do on a man who is accustomed to not being recognized and is deciding how to manage the moment that arrives when he is. "I haven't been associated with that unit in a long time," he said. Dr. Okafor turned to face the small crowd that had gathered. Helen, Owen, Joel, Tasha, a handful of parents and teachers who had drifted in from the edges of the gymnasium. She spoke carefully, the way a person speaks when they understand that what they're saying will be the version of events that most people in this room carry with them. "Conrad Beaumont," she said, "spent 26 years in the Canadian Forces in the Directorate of Technical Intelligence. He was attached for 17 of those years to a unit that does not have a public name and does not appear in any Canadian Forces public record. What I know, because my doctoral supervisor knew him, is that Conrad Beaumont worked on communications and signals intelligence during a period when the problems his unit was solving did not exist in any academic literature, because the academic literature wasn't cleared for them. The methods he and his colleagues developed during the early 1980s, for encoding, for signal analysis, for certain classes of mathematical proof that have applications in cryptography, were declassified in 2001 and now appear in graduate-level texts. She paused. He just solved, with pencil and paper, in 36 minutes, 5 problems that I helped write at 8 o'clock this morning, specifically because I believed the combination would be unsolvable in the time available. Nobody started applauding. The moment was wrong for applause. It was the kind of moment that needs room. Owen Pratt was looking at the floor. His rectangular glasses had slid slightly down his nose, and he hadn't corrected them. Joel Assiniboine was no longer managing his face at all, and had stopped pretending to try. Helen Macready was standing very still. She had been a mathematics professor for 28 years. She recognized, with a particular clarity that comes from a long career, in a discipline that demands precision, that she was in the presence of something she might not fully understand for some time. Conrad put on his jacket. He looked at the whiteboard for a moment, the 5 problems still chalked there, still unsolved by everyone else, now bearing a quiet weight they hadn't had before. The way old men look at things sometimes when they're cross-checking some private reckoning against what the world is showing them. Then he looked at Dr. Okafor. "You said your doctoral supervisor knew me." Dr. Okafor's voice caught just once. "Yes, Dr. René Ouellet, McGill. He passed in 2018. He told me about you the year before he died, about a man from Petawawa who could look at a problem and find the door that wasn't supposed to be there. He never told me your name. He said he didn't have clearance to." Conrad was quiet for a moment. "René," he said. The name came out the way a name comes out when it belongs to a memory that's been kept somewhere careful. He used to fall asleep in the library and wake up having solved whatever he'd been working on. He claimed it was his best method. I used to wonder if he was right. There was a small sound from somewhere in the room that might have been laughter and might have been something else. Tasha, the young volunteer, stepped forward with the competition check in an envelope. Her hand was not entirely steady. "Mr. Beaumont, the prize is yours. $10,000, payable to whomever you choose." Conrad looked at the envelope for a long moment, the way a man looks at something he didn't come for. "Could you make it out to Valley View Secondary School?" he said. "Attention to whatever teacher runs their mathematics team. They'll know what to do with it." He considered for a moment. If there isn't one, they'll need to start one. Tasha nodded and didn't say anything, which was the right decision. Owen Pratt walked over then. He had taken his tournament lanyard off, which he had not done all weekend. He held it in his hand the way people hold things when they need something to do with their hands. "Sir," he said, "I owe you an apology. I spoke to you in a way that was." Conrad put a hand briefly on the young man's shoulder. "You were being competitive. Don't make more of it than it is. You're fast and you're thorough. Your work on problem 2 this morning was solid. You rushed the setup on problem 4 though, and it cost you. If you want to talk about it sometime, I'm not hard to find." Owen nodded. He nodded several times, actually quickly, in the way a person nods when they are trying to absorb more information than the moment is giving them time to process. Dr. Okafor walked Conrad and Joel out to the parking lot. She held the door of the Dodge Ram open while Conrad climbed in, his left hip making the process take a moment longer than it might have. Before she closed the door, she said, "Conrad, the department at the U of A would be honored to have you, even just as a guest, a lecture, an afternoon, whatever you'd be willing to give." Conrad looked at her through the open window. The November air was cold now, the way it gets in the north when the sun drops, and the parking lot lights were starting to come on. "I'll think about it," he said. "Tell your students something for me, though, if you think it's useful." She waited. "Tell them that the hardest problems don't announce themselves. They look like the ones you've already seen. The only way to know the difference is to sit with them long enough that you stop hoping to recognize something." He put the truck in reverse. Dr. Vivienne Okafor stepped back from the door. She stood in the parking lot in her grey blazer as the Dodge Ram rolled through the lot and out onto the service road and disappeared past the tree line. She stood there for a moment after the taillights were gone, her breath making small clouds in the cold air. Inside, the volunteer crew was beginning to erase the whiteboard. 5 problems coming down in slow arcs of the eraser, each one leaving a pale ghost where the chalk had been. Owen Pratt was still at the challenge table, sitting now with Conrad's solution sheets in front of him. Helen had made copies before the originals went into the competition record, reading through them again in the long November quiet. He would read them 4 more times before he left that evening. The gymnasium lights were the kind that take a while to warm up and never quite get there, and under them the solution sheets looked like what they were. 5 pages of pencil on graph paper, written by a man who had spent half a century in rooms that will never appear in any public document, solving problems that were not supposed to have solutions, and had never thought it worth mentioning until a young man with a cane asked him along on a Saturday in November because there were going to be problems. And Conrad had said he liked problems. If this story stayed with you, if you believe that the men and women who served in silence deserve more than anonymity in a folding chair at the back of the room, subscribe to Echoes of Courage and stay with us. We find the ones nobody is looking for, and the next time you see a quiet stranger raise a hand at the back of a crowd, remember Conrad Beaumont and give them room to step forward.